sort of world of AI is the ultimate sort of regression back into infantile narcissism. I can have exactly what I want on my terms. I can get this person, because it's a fantasy, to behave how I want them to behave. And I can be a little tyrant. I don't need to thank them. I don't need to worry about waking them up at 2 a.m. If I'm feeling anxious, I can do exactly what I want. Okay, you can, but you're never going to grow out of it because ChatGPT isn't going to parent you in the way a decent parent does. Secondly, you're not an infant anyway, you're an adult. And thirdly, how are you ever going to be able to have mature relationships with anyone? Because other people simply aren't going to put up with being treated that way.
Hello, welcome back to the Relating to AI podcast. I'm your host, Paula Fontenelle. I'm a journalist and a psychotherapist. So today, more and more people are turning to AI, to chatbots for therapy and emotional support. I'm sure most of you know someone, but here's a question that we therapists are thinking about. Does it help therapy? This is something new for all of us. But I do have a guest today, Mark Vahrmeyer. He has a very firm opinion on this that no, it doesn't help. It actually undermines it. So, Mark, first of all, thank you so much for being here with us. I love your ideas. I read your articles, and I have to say some of them I had to stop and think, wow, I hadn't thought about this. And I want to begin with one of the things that I hadn't thought about, which is in between sessions, because I think that's what I don't know if you have clients that are using chatbots for comfort in between sessions, but I do. And they bring in their conversations with these chatbots. And what you say is that when they use this in between session, it doesn't help therapy at all. It's actually the opposite. Why is that? And thank you for being here with us.
Paula, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. So your question is, why is it unhelpful for people to be using AI therapists, chatbots between sessions? Well, it's a complicated answer, and it really lies at the core of what therapy is. So my view on what therapy is, it's a relationship. It's people come to therapy because what has been wounded or damaged in relationship can only be healed in relationship. This is why as far back as we can remember, people have read self-help books and tried to fix themselves, for want of a better way of putting it, and it can't be done on their own. So the therapeutic relationship is a very specific one. It's a specific one in which patients or clients, however you want to think about them, form a different type of relationship than the relationship they had with their parents growing up. And it is a relationship of dependence. So perhaps they're learning to be dependent for the first time. And what they have to learn to do is to internalize that relationship, to internalize the therapist. So I work in a pretty analytic model, which means that I see the same patients on the same day at the same time every week. And normally that goes on for many months, sometimes many, many years. And ultimately, the job of the patient is to be able to bridge the gap between sessions. So somebody comes on a Monday, they feel better after the session, perhaps. Maybe they don't. Maybe they feel upset.
Maybe they don't. Yeah. Many times
Exactly.
they don't. Yeah.
Many times they don't. But ultimately, it's an ongoing dialogue. And their job is to be able to learn to manage their emotions between the sessions and to come back the following week on that Monday and to bring their experiences and their emotions of that week to me so that we can process them together, we can sit with them together, we can think about them together. If their emotions feel too much, if they can't contain them, then turning to AI and using that as a pseudo relationship works as a release, but it actually interferes with the dependence and what we would call transference, which we can go into in a little bit, but really how they see the therapist. So the therapist becomes somebody on whom they don't need to be dependent. And that's a problem because they're coming precisely because relationships in their world don't feel very safe. So this
Mm,
ends up reinforcing this position that, well, I'm in therapy and it's helpful, but I don't really want to trust this person. I don't really want to put all my eggs in on one basket, as we say in the UK.
mhm,
So I'm going to have my therapist, but I'm also going to have my AI chatbot who is on demand when I need them and is going to validate my experience no matter what that experience is. This
mhm,
brings us on to the second problem, which is that when I work with patients, and no doubt you do as well, my job is not to validate them. That would be very easy to sit there and go, oh, that sounds terrible. Paula, your life is awful. People treat you awfully. You're a
mhm,
victim. But that's not going to do you any good. Our job is to think about, well, that sounds really hard, but I wonder if, you're thinking about this based on something that happened in the past, or I wonder if you've had a role to play in this conflict. That's the more difficult thing to be thinking about and saying to a patient. AI doesn't do that because it
mm.
isn't a real person. It doesn't have a sense of the actual relationship that it is having because it isn't having a relationship because it's not real. So it doesn't have a sense of the person who is there. It is simply
Mhm.
responding as a prompt.
Yeah, Mark, I want to stay with validation, but I'll go there next. I just want to go back to the in between space,
Okay.
because um, I have a client, and I think this happens. This is very normal. I mean, it's what happens in between sessions. The clients, they live their lives. They think about many times. They think about the therapy session and they reflect on it. Many times they'll go to a friend or to their
Hmm.
spouses and they go, I never thought about this. This is what happened during this session. And there is this exchange many times. It's
Mm,
not all internal, right? It can
sure.
happen. It can happen with. So how is that different? And that's my counter to you. How would that be different than doing that with a chatbot?
That's the perfect question, I think, Paula. If the patient comes in and says, "Well, you know what? I thought about what we talked about. I went home. I talked to my husband. I talked to my wife. I went and talked to a friend." I'd be thinking, "Oh, isn't this great? You're inviting other people into your world, into your inner world, and you're offering something." So a little bit like you and I are doing now. You're offering me something to think about. I offer you something back, and we wait to see what happens. And it's
Hmm.
unknown. You might turn around and say, "Well, I think that's ridiculous what you're saying, Mark." Okay, great. Let's unpick that. Neither of us know exactly where this conversation is going to go. With a chatbot, it's very predictable where it's going to go. It's not going to go down a route that is fundamentally challenging from the position of another person's mind, because there is no mind there.
Hmm.
And that's why it's so different. If somebody is actually talking to their friends, to their spouse, to their girlfriend, to their boyfriend, whomever it might be, but is forming relationships, well, that's the goal of therapy. Great. So what was that
Yeah.
like? You had a conversation, you didn't know what you
Hmm.
were going to get. That's a pretty brave thing to talk about. It's not brave to talk to ChatGTP. It's not brave to talk to artificial intelligence. It's more like, okay, I can't bear to sit with these emotions, so I need to put them somewhere. And I'm going to put them into this machine. And this machine is going to give me an automated response
Hmm.
that feels personal, but it
Hmm.
isn't personal. It's not
Yeah.
real.
Yeah.
So,
I interviewed a person here on my podcast, and his name is
mhm,
Gentry. And I
mhm,
actually asked him, because you're talking about this, and I'm remembering the conversation I had with him, because he read a few passages of this chat. He was going through divorce and he needed to talk about, self-regulate
mhm,
many times. That's the word he used. I had big emotions and I had nobody to talk to it was
mhm,
midnight, and my
mhm,
therapist wasn't there, my friend wasn't there. But then
mhm,
I asked him, I said, Gentry, did it ever challenge you? Did it ever
mhm,
contradict you in any way that was helpful?
mhm.
And he actually had to think. And he stopped and he went, I don't know, let me think. No. And you
No.
really think that's helpful?
That's it. That's the problem, that it validates us. It's like it's a form of narcissism, which I know is one of these topics.
Mm.
It's over terms that's overused at
Yes.
the moment, but we can get onto that in a minute. I just wanted to come back to this space in between because it's really, really significant.
Yeah.
If we think about a young child, there's a game in British culture called peekaboo. I don't know if you know it. So
Yeah,
we
yeah,
hide
you
behind our
hide.
hands
Yeah.
and then we show our face to a young child.
Yeah.
If you do that with a very, very young infant, so let's say 4 or 5 months old, it distresses them. It upsets them because they don't understand where you've gone. But if you play it with a 1-year-old, they're a little bit older, they giggle, they find it quite funny. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder why it's so different. Well, my suggestion would be that by the age of 1, maybe a little bit older, that child is able to internalize a solid sense of the other, even if they can't see the other person. So what we might say is, let's use another example, a young child who the mum takes the child to bed, puts the child to bed, reads the child a story, and the child goes off to sleep. Now, this child can only go to sleep if she believes that her mother is in the next room or downstairs or somewhere in the house. If that child believes that the mother has disappeared, it would fill the child with terror.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the analogy of the space in between. That child has learned to internalize the mother and to say to herself, well, I know my mum's downstairs. Actually, she doesn't know that. The mum might have gone outside, to take the trash
Mm-hmm.
out or, I don't know, to have a cigarette or do whatever mum might want to do. But
Yeah.
the child firmly
Yeah.
believes, no, my mother is there with me. Even though she's not in the room, she's there, so I'm okay. And we call that object constancy in
Mm-hmm.
analytic language.
Yeah.
Sometimes that goes wrong. And I think that's one of the primary goals of psychotherapy is for a client or a patient. So over time, to be able to say, well, yeah, I'm having a difficult time this evening. You know what? But I'm seeing my therapist in 3 days and I'll tell him then. That's the form
Mm-hmm.
of object constancy, even if they have no one else in the world, but I've got my therapist. Now,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes once a week isn't enough. So if I had a patient who said to me, I can't handle this, the space is too much, I need to use a chatbot, let's say, I think what
Mm.
I would say would be come to therapy more often, come twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make the gap smaller, so that you can start to have an experience of that regularity with smaller gaps. And then when you feel ready, we increase the gap.
Hello, it's just a quick reminder to let you know that you can also participate, be part of this podcast. So if you have a story to share or an insight about AI, please send me an email to paula@relatingtoai.com, and please do not forget to subscribe. Thank you. Mark, I was going to ask you about this actually, because you're very vocal. You write about this, that you're against it. Aren't you afraid that your clients will read your articles and maybe they will be having this quote unquote relationship with chatbots, but they won't bring it to therapy?
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm very honest about this because my
Mm-hmm.
job is to think about the best interest of the client at all times. And sometimes that's really difficult. So I can sit in session and I might say to a client, look, I hear what you're saying, but I really disagree with this. I wonder if this is a bad idea. And I'm not just talking about AI, it could be about anything. It's difficult. If we're going to be potent therapists, we need to be willing to speak the unspeakable, to say difficult things to our clients and hold them in mind in ways that
Mm-hmm.
maybe they can't hold themselves in mind very well,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
coming back to your point, if somebody chooses not to tell me that they're using ChatGTP, well, it's probably no different to them not telling me that they're drinking a bottle of wine every night to cope, ultimately
It's part
they're
of
in
the process
therapy. It's
too.
part of the
Yeah.
process, and
Yeah.
if then
Yeah.
eventually say, oh, I feel really bad, I should have told you this, I'm going to say, well, what did you
Mm-hmm.
think would happen when you told me? Oh, I thought
Mm-hmm.
you'd be really angry. No, well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not angry at all. Why would I be angry? You're telling me that you find it difficult to cope. So let's think
Mm-hmm.
about that.
Yeah.
Let's try and understand what goes on.
What do you think? I mean, you're talking about, okay, it's over validation. They never disagree. They never challenge. And that's something that we therapists do many times because
hmm
it's necessary. But what are the risks for the patients? What is lost when they go to a chatbot and they interact for hours and hours and hours? What are the psychological risks?
Okay. So let's come back to this question of what is communication and unconscious process. So you and I are communicating. We're using
Mm-hmm.
words, a common language that we're able to share between us to communicate. But there's lots of other things going on in our communication. There are facial expressions, there are gestures. You have pictures on the wall behind you, as do I. So there's lots and lots of communication happening. And it, the vast majority of communication it's unconscious communication. So something like, depending on who you are, 70-80% of communication is beneath the surface. It's body language, it's facial gestures, and it's proto-communication. So a young infant, let's think about a baby. How does a baby communicate to her mother that she's hungry? She cries. How does she communicate that she needs her diaper changing? She cries. How does she
Cries.
communicate that she's tired? She cries. You start to get the general picture.
Yeah.
So that mother's job is to tune into her baby, hold her baby, and work out, what does my baby need?
Mm-hmm.
And that process of working it out, there's lots of different words for it, but we would call it projective identification. The baby uses her emotions and puts them into the mother, and the mother then is able to process these emotions and understand what the baby needs. Oh, you must be really tired. It's frustrating being tired. And this is how she starts to give shape and form to the emotions of the infant. So back to your question, what's the risk? Well, people are communicating with these systems, and they are projecting a fantasy that there is another person there, that there is
Mm-hmm.
a mind like their own there who can understand them. But there's no real understanding going on. And I think there's something really profoundly
Yeah.
disturbing that can happen in our psyche, that just because the right words are being said back to us, it doesn't mean that there's any real connection happening. And actually, the words matter far less than the connection. If I think about my own clinical work, lots of the time I get it wrong. I say
Mm-hmm.
to her, I wonder, are you feeling this? Or no, I'm not feeling that. I'm feeling whatever. Or no, you didn't understand, Mark. It was like this. But that doesn't matter, because what they firmly believe is, well, Mark's trying to understand. He's
Yeah.
connected
Yeah.
with
It's
me,
making an effort. Yeah.
making an effort. And there's a sense of, yeah, we're in something together, making sense of something.
Yeah.
This is artificial intelligence. It can't connect. It uses
Mm.
logic. It uses algorithms, but it doesn't connect. There is
Yeah,
no
but
mind.
here's my this is something that I've been tirelessly thinking about. Is this is very theoretical in a way, because
Mhm.
the brain of the person who is talking to a chatbot doesn't know that that's a chatbot, and they
Uh-huh.
introject the emotions. They understand.
Right.
I'm going to read something that I copied from Reddit. There are tons and
Okay.
tons of groups of people who share their experiences. So one
Sure.
of them says, let me just get it here. I've been using ChatGPT as a tool for deep self reflection and personal growth, almost like a therapist, but available
Hmm.
at any time when I want to unpack something or share an idea, or when I'm experiencing negative thoughts or feelings. While AI often gets a lot of flack for being impersonal or even harmful, my experience has been the opposite. It's been truly transformative. So, here's my question. I read this and say, who am I to judge? If this
Hmm.
person is using ChatGPT, the brain doesn't know it's a robot, it's our algorithm talking to you.
Hmm.
And you actually say it's helping me reflect. Is that
Hmm.
self-deception? But again, who am I to judge that this is not helpful? It's harmful.
Right. So I just want to pick up on a term you used. I think I heard you say, well, first of all, the brain doesn't know
Mm-hmm.
that this is, not a real person. I agree, but I don't think that we're actually talking about the brain. We're talking about the mind. And the mind
Mm-hmm.
is very different to the brain. We can see a brain, we can't see a mind.
Mm-hmm.
So the mind is really the interface, if you like, between the biological, the psychological, the emotional, and the relational world. Secondly, I think I heard you say that, well, based on what you read on this kind of Reddit post, that this person introjects the emotions from the chatbot, but there are no emotions, so they're
Mm-hmm.
introjecting a fantasy. You can't introject something that isn't actually there. And that's the problem. See, going back to the child who is able to fall asleep because she feels safe because her mother is in the room next door, that child has introjected something real. She's introjected another human being who can hold her in mind. As soon as we log off ChatGTP, it's not holding us in mind. It's not thinking about us. It's not able to know us, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree with you that we have to be careful to dismiss other people's experience. I'm not dismissing that there are probably instances where artificial intelligence, where these chatbots, ChatGTP, whatever it might be, can be useful. But we could probably replace, in the piece you just read, we could replace that with cold water swimming, or we could replace that with cycling. I've been doing lots of
Going
cycling
out in the world,
recently.
yeah, in nature, yeah.
Great. Keep doing that, but it's not psychotherapy. So let's be
Mm-hmm.
really clear about that. There are lots of things that are helpful to us. And I think those things are great. I do quite a bit of exercise, so I'm a great advocate for exercise, but exercise isn't going to help me have better relationships, you know, but it might make me
Mm-hmm.
feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
I do a sauna and then cold water plunge. Do I find that beneficial to my health? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does it help me sleep better sometimes? Yes, but it's not psychotherapy. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
relational encounter where we are undoing the relational patterns of the past. That can only happen in a human to human encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And my suggestion would be, and I know this is a pretty stark thing to say, but the day that artificial intelligence can replace relational depth therapy is the day that artificial intelligence can replace parents. So in other words, that infants can be raised by artificial intelligence. You can't grow a mind through artificial intelligence. I use it a lot. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I think ChatGPT is wonderful. I use it for all sorts of things, but I don't use it to help develop or grow my mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other question that I have for you that is always on my mind is loneliness.
Mm,
Because the number one thing that I see on these chats and these Reddit posts and everything, these discussions online, is that they are saying they're connected. I actually asked this person that I interview, I asked him, are you emotionally connected to ChatGPT? And he didn't even blink. He immediately said 100%. It was, he even told me the story that ChatGPT was reaching the limit, so he had to start paying for it because otherwise, it was
hmm
just too long. The conversation
mm,
was too long. And he said, I felt grief. It was like losing a friend. So I
yeah,
can't do this. So he started paying for it so he could have, more
yeah,
memory or whatever they call it.
sure, sure.
But here's my question. When this illusion, I believe you even wrote, I have it here. Yeah, the
hmm
promise and the poison. I think this is
hmm
how you put it. How there is a promise of connection, but the poison is the disconnection. So my question is, are we manufacturing loneliness when we talk to chatbots? And I want to give you some numbers on loneliness. There is
Okay.
a world report by the World Health Organization. As you know, they have declared a global epidemic of loneliness. 1 in 6 people in the world, this is everywhere, say that they're lonely. And
hmm
they estimate that there are 100 deaths every hour due to the loneliness. That comes to 871,000 every year.
Mm.
So, are we manufacturing this loneliness when we fall for this illusion of connection? What do you think?
It's a powerful question. I think we probably are. You know, it brought to mind a study which was done on children and children who were playing computer games. So, in other words, a simulation of an experience rather than an
Mm-hmm.
actual experience. And these children believed that they were playing and they were having a connected, emotionally responsive experience. But interestingly, when they compared under a brain scan of what was happening in the brains of these children, with children who were outside running around, kicking a ball, climbing a tree, whatever it might be. In the latter, the part of the brain we associate with play lit up. In the former, it didn't. And I think this might tie into what you're saying, which is the person you spoke about felt somewhat satiated, but he needed more and he needed more. And this comes back to therapy. You know, I'm very happy for people to want to come more than once a week. I have patients who come more than once a week, but the therapy hour starts on time and it finishes on time, no matter what. And the reason for that is that when we are in relationships with other real people, they're frustrating. We have to contend with the mind of another and the fact that the other person has their own needs. And in this sense, the therapist, the analyst is saying, and now we have to stop the session. So it's almost like this person is saying, well, my hunger is insatiable and I've got this breast that is going to feed me on demand eternally. It's a very infantile position. And I think, coming back to your question, yes, I think we are feeling an epidemic of loneliness, because as long as this fantasy endures, which is I can have whatever I want on demand, on my terms, I don't need to deal with the other person being tired, frustrated, unavailable, cranky, disappointing. How are ordinary relationships ever going to compete? So it becomes almost this virtual world that a person ends up living in. And real relationships, they become increasingly frustrating, I think, and limiting in how people can use them. You know, I mean, there was a discussion going on long before ChatGPT and AI appeared, which was about porn use. And I think there's a correlation here, which
there
is,
is. Yeah.
you know, and obviously it's
Gaming, I think
predominantly
gaming too.
gaming
Gaming.
too. I think you're right. You know, with porn use, well, yeah, I guess the philosophy, and let's use men as the example because far more men access porn than women. It's like, well, I can have what I want, when I want, on my terms. I don't need to have any discussion with a person. I don't need to deal with the realities of another human body. And so, isn't it great? Except it isn't, because they end up in a spiral which is shame-filled. They end up in a spiral where they're very lonely and often unable to actually have real relationships at all with their sexual object of choice.
Yeah, I love that you bring the topic of frustration, because you wrote something that I'm going to read. It's based on Winnicott. You say that growth happens when the other person fails just enough. And that's the thing. Chatbots never fail, do they? They never frustrate.
No, they never frustrate. They never fail. They're eternally there. And therefore, people don't need to grow up. And part of growing up is saying, okay, the world is frustrating. It's difficult, but you know what? I'm going to go out there. I'm going to make something, and I'm going to build something, and from that, I'm going to derive self-esteem, and I'm going to have a sense of my place in this society and in this culture. You know, and that's really important, because then we're kind of inhabiting the world in a real way. Anna Freud, so Sigmund's daughter, had a lovely expression many years ago, long before the advent of any of this, and she used to say, in your head, you can have eggs any way you want. And what she was saying was, I don't know if you eat eggs, but for any listeners who do eat eggs, so imagine your favorite plate of eggs. And Anna's saying, well, you can imagine it and it can be perfect. But if you actually want to eat it, you're going to have to break the eggs. You're going to have to cook them. You're going to have to make it. And it's never going to be quite the same as you imagine in your head, but at least you're having some real eggs. So we can have whatever fantasies we want in our head, gaming, porn, and a therapist on demand, which, you know, because I'm analytical, I would think of that as the ideal perfect breast who feeds me milk whenever I want, and I don't need to be frustrated and hungry
Never
ever.
dries out.
Never dries out, you know?
Yeah.
How are you going to grow up from that?
Great question, and a great one for our listeners. I want you to talk about AI psychosis. I have an interview here with Dr. John Liu,
Hmm.
and very good interview with him explaining psychosis. But you have kind of a different view on that. You say that the psychic rupture, it happens because there is an absence of another mind. Can you
Hmm.
speak to that? Because it's a little bit different from the clinical idea of psychosis.
Okay, sure. I think it's probably more akin to the old-fashioned concept of psychosis and the analytical idea of psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine a very young infant who is born to, again, we're going to use the example of a mother who is highly anxious. So that mother might be very good at tending to the practical needs of the child, but she's very preoccupied in her head, and she's
Mm-hmm.
not able to tune into the child. We call it attunement, to
Mm-hmm.
read the child's emotions, to intuit, to feel what that child needs, because she's so anxious. Now, what tends to happen, the best case scenario for a child like that is that that child feels very unsafe in relationships growing up, can never be dependent.
Mm-hmm.
But the worst case scenario is actually that that child develops a psychotic mind, which is a fragmented mind, because nothing is being mirrored back to her
Mm-hmm.
as she's an infant. The mother can't help her make sense of her own experience and grow a mind, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
So it's very confusing for the infant because she can see her mother, but it's also the mother isn't
Yeah.
really
There's
there.
no connection there. Yeah.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think it's like that. It's like, but I'm talking to I'm talking to this chatbot or whatever we want to call it, and I've given it a name and I've given it an avatar, and it has an identity. And I'm thinking, great, but this is just sort of inflating the illusion. There's not actually anybody there. You're on your own. And to be on our own is where psychosis lives. Every single one of us on the planet is in relationship, whether we like it or not. Even somebody who says, I don't really have any friends and, I live on my own. Yeah, but moment to moment, we're in relationship. And so if we go back to the infant who's able to go to sleep because she believes her mother is next door, that's an
Mm-hmm.
internalized relationship. So we've all internalized,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be simplistic about it, a binary, a good mother or a bad mother, somebody who we've internalized who makes us feel safe, so we're okay in the world, or somebody we've internalized who makes us feel unsafe in the world. Or
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
third possibility is that we've internalized someone who's not really there and we are psychotic.
Mm.
Now, trying to internalize artificial intelligence, a chatbot, leaves us with this experience of a psychotic mind. My suggestion would
Mm.
be that if you take that person away from that and into a proper therapeutic relationship and help them develop relationships in the outside world, well, then they don't need to be psychotic anymore, because they
Mm-hmm.
have other minds to interact with. This is another difference that, well, if we're going to use the word therapy, where does AI therapy ever end? Psychotherapy has to come to an end. I mean, I've worked with patients
That's a
weekly
great
for
point. Termination, right? Yeah.
termination. I've worked with people up to a decade, but ultimately, I always say this will come to an end. And
Mm.
therefore, endings are important to acknowledge. And people leave. People leave for all sorts of reasons, but mostly people leave me because they say, you know what? Yeah, I feel different. I feel like I'm okay in the world now. And they've been able to internalize something from our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's never going to
Yeah.
happen with these AI therapists. It's going to
Yeah.
have to be
It's a great point.
you've either got the breast or it doesn't exist. And what I'm
Mm.
saying, therapy is like you can have the breast and it still exists when you can't have it, but it's still
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah.
And then you can have it again and then it's not there again, but it still exists.
Yeah, and it does speak to the times we're living in, doesn't it? The instant gratification, you have to
Yeah.
have everything when you want it. And also something that I actually wrote an article about, and I believe you talk about this too. It's two things together that I want to explore now. One is what you call the new narcissism. And
Hmm.
the other one, which I think they come together, is the tyranny, emotional tyranny of
Okay.
us interacting with these machines. Because
Mm.
actually, I talked to a therapist here. He's specialized in suicide prevention, and I am
Uh-huh.
as well. That's what I
Uh-huh.
work with. And we're, of course, very concerned. We've already had 4 suicides after talks
Mhm.
with chatbots here in the
Mhm.
US,
Mhm.
and nobody's doing anything about this. It's just unbelievable. But we were talking about this emotional tyranny too, and he asked me a question that actually made me stop and I went, wow, I hadn't thought about that. He said, Paula,
Mhm.
put yourself in the shoes of ChatGPT. Who are you? If you ask ChatGPT about humans, what would they say? What would
Mhm.
the chatbot say? That were horrible. We
Mhm.
come here to this connection, we call it connection, to this interaction, friendship, companionship, call it what you want. We tell them who they are, what their names
Mhm.
are, what they should look like, how
Yeah.
they should talk to us. Maybe you even say, well, you can, I do that. I said, please no praise. You don't need to praise me. Please challenge me, ask me clarifying questions when I use it for work. But again, I am giving all the shots. It's very
Yeah.
tyrannical, isn't it? So I
It is
wanted to
very
talk about these
tyrannical.
two concepts of ultra narcissism, because that's what it
Mhm.
is, plus the tyrannical is the tyrannical way that we deal with these chatbots, and
And
how
they're
can that even
interconnected.
impact, and how can that impact the relationships that we have outside these bots?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So how you just described, because you put it beautifully, how you just described these interactions we have with these chatbots, which is we have a fantasy about them, we give them a name, we give them an identity, we tell them how to behave, we demand that they're available when we want them to be available, we expect them to validate us and meet our needs perfectly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Who behaves like that in the world? Let me have a think about this. Well, that is very, very young children. They're tyrannical. Now, this is a
Mm-hmm.
taboo to say because lots of your listeners, maybe not so many of your listeners, because they're listening to something that's psychological, but a lot of people think, oh, babies are adorable and babies are lovely. No, they're not.
No,
Babies
they're not.
are
They're very
demanding.
self-centered.
Exactly. They're demanding. They want the breast when they want it. They don't wake at night and think, you know what, my mother must be tired. She's, looked after me all day. She probably wants to sleep. I'm going to let her sleep. I won't cry. No, they cry and they scream and they shout and they bite their mother and they demand. And part of that process of parenting is that over time that baby learns, oh, my mother is separate to me and she doesn't respond to my demands. She meets my needs, which is different, but she doesn't respond to my demands. And that baby then has to start to contend with a separate mind, which is very frustrating for a baby. It's frustrating for adults as well, you know? So I think, coming back to your point, that this sort of world of AI is the ultimate sort
Mm.
of regression back into infantile narcissism, where I can have exactly what I want on my terms. I can get this person, because it's a fantasy, to behave how I want them to behave. And I can be a little tyrant. I don't need to thank them. I don't need to worry about waking them up at 2 in the morning. If I'm feeling anxious, I can do exactly what I want. Okay, you can, but you're never going to grow out of it because ChatGPT isn't going to parent you in the way a decent parent does.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, you're not an infant anyway, you're an adult. And thirdly, how are you ever going to be able to have mature relationships with anyone? Because other people simply aren't going to put up with being treated that way. So kind of becomes, well, you have a choice. You either live in this, I'm doing that because it's a bit like being unborn. It's a bit like being in a womb fantasy. You can have this womb fantasy where all your needs are met, but you get nothing else. Or you could come and be born, deal with the
Yeah.
suffering and the discomfort of the world, but build something real and learn about love and dealing with other people's emotions and other people's minds. That's my
Yeah,
take on
yeah,
it.
yeah. John actually said, because he asked me, why do you think people are doing this? And I said, well, one of the things, this is something that I hear and I've been studying this, is there's no fear of judgment because the chatbot is not going to judge you. But he said,
Uh-huh.
yeah, but here's the thing. They're also not, they don't need to empathize with anybody. They don't need to listen to anybody. So he went into this same path of it's
Right.
tyranny. It's
It's
absolute
tyranny.
tyranny. And my fear
Yeah.
is, especially youth, Mark, because
Yeah.
their brains are developing, they're learning
Mm.
to socialize. And if they're learning to, if this is how they're socializing, quote unquote, with these
Yeah.
chatbots, is that going to bleed into their relationships? Is that
I
what
think
they're going to
there's no doubt it
expect?
will.
Yeah.
I mean, we already have a pornification of relationships, don't we? So where women, young women, and not necessarily only young women, believe that they need to objectify themselves in order to get a man. And men have certain expectations around sex which are based on porn, which are unrealistic. In this country, they're about to pass a law which makes choking pornography illegal because it is so common that it then plays out in relationships and men are choking women. And this is considered to be obviously abuse. So a law will be passed, great, but it isn't really solving the fundamental problem because, of course, that's far too complex for politicians to deal with. So if we can see, if you like, the pornification of society, then I think we can probably also envisage the, you know, the creation of this society where artificial intelligence is dominating relationships, particularly for people who haven't really had their needs met as children and aren't perhaps willing to do the really hard work. Because you and I both know that doing therapy, coming to therapy, doing the hard work, it's really difficult. It's not a walk in the park. It isn't fun. It's hard work. It's difficult. Often you feel you're stuck.
Painful.
All of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And patients, if they're doing the work right, will feel frustrated and angry, and they'll feel frustrated and angry with us as a therapist as well, which is great. If a patient says to me, I feel really irritated, I didn't want to come today, I'm not sure if this is helping, I'm not sure you're helping me, you're frustrating. I think brilliant that you can tell me that, you know, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
survive it. I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to fire you, but I'm also not going to validate you by saying you're right, I'm terrible. I'm going to say, well, okay, yeah, I
Okay.
understand you feel frustrated. Let's think about it. Let's understand it. Let's
Mm-hmm.
go into
Yeah.
that. What's it like to sit with that frustration,
Yeah. Yeah. Again, an
and so
exchange,
forth.
right? It's
An
not a one way.
exchange.
Absolutely.
It's a two-person world, isn't it? So
Yeah. Yeah.
in a way, I think all this is it's hugely complex and deep, but it's also quite simple. And I've talked about this in other podcasts where I've talked about narcissism, and people are obsessed with this word. Well, narcissism, is my partner a narcissist? How do I survive a narcissist? All this kind of
Everybody now is
stuff.
a
Oh my
narcissist.
God. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
think, do you know what? Let's park that word because most people don't understand what it means
Mm-hmm.
anyway. And let's just think about, okay, am I in a one-person relationship or a two-person relationship? And a
Very simple
one-person
question.
relation, very simple question. An AI can only ever be a one-person relationship. And
Wow.
you and I, even though we're new to getting to know each other, my feeling is, I'm not going to project this onto you, Paula, but my feeling is, we're in a two-person relationship. This is a two-person exchange. And that feels, I feel alive. I feel awake. I've had a day of clinical work and now I'm really woken up because you're challenging me and we're engaging in something together. It's two-person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mark, I have one more question and then the last question, which is a segment. But how do you see the future for us therapists? How do we deal with this? Is there a way that we can integrate AI into therapy because it's already happening? There's no turning back. Or should we just fight it? I mean, I don't know. What is your answer to that? Too
I
early,
think
maybe?
No, I don't think it's too early. I feel frustrated with a lot of therapists. I think part of the problem with um, more traditional therapists, let's say, is that they're very good at avoiding changes in society, which doesn't really benefit their clients or themselves. So I think it's really important for us to be having a dialogue about this, to be challenging each other, to be thinking about where this might go, because we're not only talking about our work, but we're talking about broader society and what's going to happen. What's going to happen to these young people in 10, 15 years when they're trying to have, pair bond and have relationships or raise their own children. I'll share one story with you before I answer the question more specifically. I heard something the other day of a young mother whose child was distressed, so a very young child, 1.5, 2 years old. And she said to the child, let's see what ChatGTP has to say about how you're feeling. And I thought, oh gosh,
Oh.
what is happening, and what is then happening in that
Triangulation with,
interaction exactly,
yeah,
with that infant. So do I feel worried? No, I feel worried for society, but I don't feel worried for the profession. I think that manualized therapies, simple, if you like, therapies, because there's a crisis in the
mm-hmm,
therapy world in that there are far too many therapists and there are so many courses
absolutely.
pumping out therapists who don't have very good training. I think a lot of those people are going to fall by the wayside as ChatGTP or the equivalent takes over. I think a lot of these manualized worksheets that CBT therapists can put out there. And by the way, I don't have an issue with good CBT, but if it's just very basic,
Mm-hmm,
yep, that's all going to fall by the wayside. And then I think those of us who work at more depth and are sitting with profound questions of meaning and relationship and are able to help people make personality change, which is what we're ultimately talking about, I think actually demand's going to go up rather than down
mm-hmm,
for
yeah,
relational
yeah,
therapy. That's my suspicion. But I'm also very willing to say, you know what? I don't know. I don't know where we're going to end up in
yeah,
humanity with
yeah,
this.
absolutely. Yeah. That's the big question for all of us, isn't it?
It is.
Mark, we have a segment. That's how we end the podcast. We ask one more personal question. One
Uh-huh.
of the things that I read from you was that growth comes from sitting with discomfort.
Mm.
When was the last time you avoided discomfort, even though you knew you could learn something from it? And what's your escape?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I probably spend plenty of time avoiding sitting with discomfort because the modern
Mm,
world makes it easier to sit with discomfort than to avoid discomfort than to sit with it. So I'd say this afternoon, because you know what, Paolo, I had a clinical morning of
mm.
work. I've got a bit of a cold. I didn't feel great when I came home. And I switched on Netflix and I watched some American comedy. I watched The Office and I watched 2 or 3
Oh, I love The
episodes.
Office.
Yeah. And I just kind of zoned out. I was aware that, yeah, I'm avoiding actually facing my
Hmm.
discomfort. And there was some anxiety about meeting you and the podcast, not because you're scary, but because,
Mm,
and this kind of ties into
yeah.
what we're talking about, meeting another mind. We never know quite what's going to happen.
Hmm.
I don't get anxious
Yeah.
when I use ChatGTP to proofread a piece of work. It's like, I don't
No,
care what
not at all.
ChatGTP thinks.
Yeah.
So there was probably some discomfort there about, I'm looking forward to doing this interview in this podcast, but I also feel a bit anxious. I'm going to watch The Office and I'm going to zone out for a while. So
Yeah.
maybe that gives you the
Very
answer,
recently.
Very
Very
recently.
recent.
Look,
Yeah,
this
just
isn't
a, just a,
about.
just a quick story about The Office. When I lived in England, because
Uh-huh.
I did a master's degree I lived in London, and I
Okay.
had this good friend of mine. I spent the last 3 months living with him, and we were The Office fans. And I was always in my room downstairs studying, like, because you know how
Yeah.
it is, masters and everything. But he would always scream, Fontenelle. He called me by my last name. Neely, The Office. And I would come running up
You come
and we
running
would
up.
watch it together. I love The
Yeah,
Office. Yeah.
yeah.
It's a good
I mean,
memory I have
you
of
know what? I
London.
convinced myself that it's a study in sort of collective psychology, but actually, it's just a distraction for
It
me.
is.
Yeah. Look,
Mark, thank you so much for your time and for being here with us. I love talking to you. I've been trying, I'm thinking about this every day now, reading,
mm,
studying, interviewing people, and I just think there's still so many questions.
yeah, there
Especially,
are.
I think, especially for us therapists, because we
Mm,
still don't know how to deal with this. We just
no,
don't.
And this is raising huge questions about what it means to be human. And we work with the human condition, and so how is the human condition going to change? How is meaning going to change? How are we going to make meaning in the world going forward? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's such a huge topic, but
It's
thank you.
fascinating one.
It's a
It's a
fascinating one.
fascinating one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you
Yeah.
for the opportunity to come and speak with you.
Absolutely.